Hi, and thanks for watching this demonstration on how to build a more complex vRealize Orchestrator workflow. Before watching this demonstration, you may want to watch my video on how to build a simple VRO workflow. In that demo, you can learn how to create a new folder and workflow, create and work with input parameters and attributes, use scripting and decision elements in a workflow, and write to the system log. Those skills are prerequisites to understanding this video. By the end of this demonstration, you should be able to call other workflows within your workflow, modify the presentation of your workflow, use VRO to create and delete data centers in vCenter, and call a workflow using the REST API. We will use three simple workflows as the basis of our main workflow. The first is called myCreateDataCenter, which creates a data center in vCenter using this code. The second workflow is called myDeleteDataCenter and uses this code. The third workflow is a little more complicated. Its function is to get the vCenter data center object from the data center name. It uses a for loop to loop through all the data centers looking for the proper name and returns the data center object. Excellent. Now let's take a look at how this will all work together. Our main workflow is called create or delete a DC. It starts with a decision element that will decide whether we are creating or deleting a data center. If we are creating a data center, we will follow the green arrow and run the myCreateDataCenter workflow to create the data center. If we are deleting a data center, we will follow the dotted red arrow and first get the data center object from the data center name and then delete the data center. In this main workflow, we need three inputs from the user. First, we need to know whether the user wants to create or delete a data center. If we are creating a data center, we need the name of the data center to be created. If we are deleting a data center, we need the name of the data center to be deleted. Although the first parameter is a string, we are going to limit the choices for the user to create or delete. We can do this in the Presentation tab. Here we see that there are only two predefined answers, create and delete. These will be the only options for the user to choose. While we're here, we can see that we've made two steps in the presentation. This equates to two separate sections when the user inputs the input parameters. We have also given a description for each parameter to guide the user when filling out the form. Let's run the workflow and see how this looks. We see that the two steps correspond to the two screens in the form, that the user can only choose create or delete for the first input, and that the description appears above the text box for each parameter to guide the user. Now let's take a look at the schema. The first thing we do is decide if we're creating or deleting a data center. Instead of the Boolean variable we used in the last demo, we're using a string variable here. But as you just saw, we only allow the user to choose create or delete in the form. This looks much better to the user than the Boolean yes or no and gives us the same functionality. So if the string is create, we go ahead and create the data center. If the string is not create, so it must be delete, we'll delete the data center. Now let's see how to create a data center. To create a data center, we need two attributes. We need the data center name and the vCenter data center folder. The data center name is bound to the input parameter we looked at earlier. The data center folder will never change, and so we've created an attribute for it with a default value. This is done in the bottom half of the General tab. The value, as you see here, is Data Centers. Now let's take a look at the myCreateDataCenter workflow. It's actually very simple. The two inputs are the ones we just discussed. And the only real code is this one line of JavaScript that uses the two inputs to make the create data center call. Cool. Before we get to the delete data center part of our workflow, let's run it and see if we can create a data center. As we saw earlier, the settings in the Presentation tab has forced us to choose either create or destroy. We'll choose create. The second step in the form prompts us for the new data center name or the data center to delete. I'll enter DC1 for the data center name. The second entry can be ignored since it is not used in this branch of the workflow. The green bullseye shows us that we did indeed take the success branch and that the workflow succeeded successfully. Let's check in vCenter. Sure enough, there is the new DC1 data center. Now let's take a look at the myDeleteDataCenter workflow. This workflow only needs one input, namely the data center to delete. But notice that the parameter type is vc:datacenter. We cannot simply give the name of the data center. We need to give it the data center object. Once we have that object, it's easy. We just run this destroy task method. Cool. So how do we convert the data center name to the data center object? We write a workflow, of course. The input to this workflow is the name of the data center in string format. The output will be the data center object. We'll do this by first getting all the data center objects and storing them in a variable called DCS. We then loop through all of them to find the one that matches the name we are looking for. Remember that VRO uses JavaScript, so you can easily Google to get the syntax for items such as for loops and if statements. The output of this workflow will be the data center object that we want to delete. So now, in our main workflow, we just need to check that the data center to delete is passed from the getDataCenterByName workflow to the myDeleteDataCenter workflow. And that's all there is. Let's run the workflow again and see how this works. This time, we choose delete. And enter the data center name in the second text box. As expected, the workflow took the other branch and succeeded. Looking in vCenter, we see that the data center has been deleted. Fun, huh? The last item I want to show you is how easy it is to run this workflow using a REST API call. Here I am using Bash on Windows, and I will use the curl command to make the REST call. To run a workflow, we simply need to use a post call to VRO. The call looks like this. Everything is pretty straightforward except the workflow ID and the JSON file. The workflow ID can easily be found in the General tab of the workflow in VRO. The JSON file will look like this. It simply defines the input parameters. We either create or delete, and then provide the data center name. Okay, let's run it and see. As before, we'll first create a data center. Checking an orchestrator, we see that the REST call did start a new workflow, and the workflow is successful. Checking in vCenter, we see that data center DC1 was created. Let's take a look at a JSON file for deleting a data center. This time, we assign the create or delete parameter a value of delete, and the name of the data center is going to be DC1. The curl command is exactly the same, except we point to the delete JSON file. Checking in VRO, we see that another instance of the workflow was started, and that it took the delete route, and succeeded successfully. And checking in vCenter, we see that the data center was deleted. Easy, huh? I hope you enjoyed watching this demonstration. We learned how to use workflows within workflows, modify the presentation of your workflow, use VRO to create and delete data centers in vCenter, and call a workflow using the REST API. I hope this demo will help you develop more complex and meaningful workflows in your environment. Thanks for watching.